Hello, everyone. Welcome on the Pure Wisdom Chosen Ones. You didn't see it coming, not from a single dude, not even in their wildest incantations. Did you know that in ancient legend, it was thought that their might was unrivaled when collected in a coven? They described it as unshakable oneness. But what happens when that oneness is confronted with a power so strong and inexorable that their chanting goes silent and their rituals crumble? This is not a story about armies clashing or epic battles fought with swords and shields. No, this is the tale of how one guy, a one-man army, took down an entire gang of witches. Not with charms or potions, but with pure resolve, unwavering concentration, and possibly some plain old-fashioned stubbornness. And let's be honest, it wasn't simply their failure that made them tremble. It was the way you ripped through their illusions, revealed their flaws, and emerged undamaged. Imagine that. A room full of witches murmuring in terror, not of dark powers, but of you. So brace up, because this isn't your typical chosen one tale. This is the story of how, against all odds, you broke their terrible world and why they are still too afraid to mention your name aloud. Number 1. The force of a single goal over collective disorder. The selected one acts differently from the rest of the world. While others depend on group methods and backup plans, the chosen one enters turmoil with a single, unwavering goal. It is not arrogance. It's clarity, a realization that, while others panic, overthink, or second-guess, great strength comes from concentrated purpose. That's precisely why you demolished them. The witches lived on disorder, feeding off the disorientation of their victims. Their strength lay in instilling doubt, discord, and distraction. But against you, none of it worked. Their group was intended to help them become stronger. They imagined that their rituals and cohesiveness would terrify or overpower. They didn't grasp, however, that a disorganized bunch is little more than noise. They couldn't match your concentration. You could see through their theatrics, the chanting, the symbols, and the horror they attempted to instill. And you stayed steadfast. Their numbers were a vulnerability. They depended on one another for strength, but that dependence evolved into dependency. When you hit, they were dispersed, bewildered, and helpless. They believed that you needed an army to fight an army. They underestimated the significance of one individual's mission. A single person, free of uncertainty and fear tactics, is far more dangerous than any group connected by weak links. You were not confused, distracted, or terrified. You were exact, and that accuracy sliced through them like a razor. Their pandemonium eventually unraveled, not because you were stronger in the usual sense, but because your clarity exposed their vulnerability as they rushed to recover. You stayed steady, and in that silence, they realized they had been vanquished. One man, one mission, and their supposed oneness broke like glass. Number 2, you were not just battling them. You fought their legacy. Defeating that coven of witches required more than just one fight. It was about bringing down a whole legacy. These are not people working alone. They bore the weight of generations of terrible knowledge, handed down as a twisted heritage. Each ritual and spell they performed was based on the work of those who came before them. They didn't just represent themselves. They represented a complete system of power and terror that had grown unfettered for years, maybe centuries. When you confronted them, you weren't simply competing with their numbers or collective strength. You were up against history, which they believed made them invincible. Their power lay not only in what they could do, but also in the assumption that their heritage made them invincible. They saw you as more than simply an opponent. You were a disruptor, a challenge to the very foundation of their existence. They imagined they could scare you with the weight of their history, just as they had done to so many others before. But here is the reality. Their legacy resembled a house of cards. It was based on secrecy, intimidation, and the illusion of endless might. When you refused to submit to their past, you smashed its power. You didn't just vanquish them in the present. You blasted shockwaves across the past, destroying everything their forefathers had constructed. What made it much worse for them was that you did not play their game. You didn't use counter spells or old writings to combat them. You battled against something they could not expect. Your raw and unshakable will. This is why they're afraid. They did not just lose a battle. They saw all they had been trained to believe shatter before their eyes. Their lineage, their legacy stopped with you. Number 3, the terror you instilled sprang from the fear is not only about strength. It is about the witches did not fear you because you were strong in a manner they defined power. They scared you because they could not figure you out. They had spent their life perfecting rituals, symbols, and dark arts aimed at controlling and predicting the conduct of others. But you did not obey their guidelines. You're an outlier, a blank spot in their equations. And this scared them. They anticipated you to respond in ways they could control, such as fear, hesitancy, or even outright anger. That is how they functioned. They lived on control, feeding off the emotions they elicited in their victims. But when they glanced at you, they saw something. They weren't expecting a calm, constant presence. You did not recoil at their deception. You did not fall into their trap. You were the one thing they couldn't foresee. And in their universe, the unexpected is the most deadly force of all. The more they attempted to test you, the more nervous they were. Their spells did not land as they should have. Their intimidation methods were ineffective with each unsuccessful effort to break you. Their confidence crumbled. You didn't just oppose them. You revealed the limitations of their authority. They weren't as indestructible as they imagined. You made them recognize it. That's what really broke them. It wasn't simply about your strength. It was the fact that you used their fear of the against them. They had spent so long controlling the story, and now they were fumbling in the dark. You didn't just beat them. You were the very thing they were unable to conquer. A power they could not expect or comprehend. Number 4, you become the weapon they didn't expect. Witches are excellent manipulators. They thrive on exposing underlying flaws in a person's character, taking latent anxieties, insecurities, and weaknesses and transforming them into weapons. Their power lies not in their spells, but in their ability to make others believe in their own vulnerability. That's how they defeat their foes. But when they turned their attention to you, they discovered nothing to exploit. It's not as if you didn't have concerns or vulnerabilities. It was because you had already confronted them, demolished them, and made them helpless. You weren't carrying any tools or defenses. You did not need charms, symbols, or rituals. You became the weapon. The alteration was not external. It was internal. They couldn't assault you because there was nothing else to attack. Every effort to infiltrate your mind or soul was met with a resounding failure, leaving them scurrying for an unattainable alternative. This was not something they could have planned for. They were used to confronting people who relied on external sources of power, goods, alliances, or techniques that they could deconstruct. But by the time they discovered you were your own source of strength, it was too late. They did not observe a guy with tools. They saw an example of unwavering commitment. The term one-man army was not about numbers. It was about the transfer in power. You weren't armed and defending yourself. You were the weapon. Every step closer to them shattered their illusions. With each unsuccessful effort to control you, their terror intensified. You did not merely defeat them. You deconstructed their whole attitude to power. The witches were not vanquished via tools or strategies. You beat them. Number 5 reveals the vulnerability of their united might. The witches think that their united power is their greatest strength. They trusted their coven, their rituals, and the idea that togetherness made them unstoppable. They sang simultaneously, cast spells in tandem, and had an air of flawless synchronization. However, their so-called oneness lacked strength. It was a crutch. It concealed their unique flaws and provided a false feeling of security. When you stood alone against them, you showed the illusion's frailty. They were unable to operate without the protection of their numbers. They were unprepared for someone who could confront them without backup, friends, or layers of safety. They believed they were untouchable. They depended on their rituals to maintain their bravery. But you show them what happens when that web of reliance is severed. Your presence pushed them to face a fact they had previously ignored. Their power was only effective when they had each other to depend on. When you refused to back down, their fissures started to appear. Their togetherness collapsed beneath the weight of your disobedience. Their confidence fell one by one, since their united power was never genuine. It was a protective barrier against their own dread of standing alone. What made matters worse for them was the solitude you caused them to experience. They had spent their lives projecting dread and loneliness onto others, preying on the weaknesses of those who were alone. But for the first time, they felt it. Their reliance on togetherness became thin, and their rituals lost their significance. You did not just defeat their group. You destroyed their entire base by standing alone. You demonstrated how frail their combined authority actually was. Number 6, your success forced them to face their mortality. The witches saw death as a sign that they had outgrown their spells, forbidden knowledge, and wicked rites. It all had one purpose: to give the illusion of immortality. They did not only desire power, they want permanency. They wanted to think that they were untouchable. Their legacy would extend indefinitely into the future. However, defeating them did not simply terminate their dominion. You broke the entire fantasy they had based their lives on. Your success was not based on physical force or shrewd planning. It was about drawing back the curtain on their facade. They had persuaded themselves that their spells made them invincible, but they weren't ready for someone who could cut through those layers of illusory protection. When their barriers failed, they were left with more than simply physical vulnerability. They were exposed spiritually. For the first time, they were forced to confront the awful reality they had spent their whole lives avoiding. They were mortal, just like anyone else. This knowledge struck them harder than any physical damage. They had based their identities on the notion that they were beyond the reach of time and consequences. Your success went beyond just defeating their physical bodies. It shattered their belief system. Every chant, ritual, and secret uttered in the dark was rendered ineffective in the face of someone who was not scared to confront them. What genuinely scared them was not only the defeat of the war, it was the end of their delusion. They discovered their immortality was a myth, their power was limited, and death, which they believed they had vanquished, was always waiting for them. Your triumph did not just terminate their reign. It pushed them to face the reality they had long rejected. They were never untouchable. Number 7. The psychological war was won before the fight started, long before the first move was taken. The war had already been decided. The witches had constructed their whole strategy around dread, rejecting, increasing, and controlling it. Dread was their preferred weapon, sharper than any spell. It was successful because most people trusted in the strength of their delusions. However, fear only grows when the mind accepts it as genuine. And that is where they failed you. Your unwavering commitment was their undoing. They came at you with all they had. Whispers intended to create uncertainty. Shadows designed to elicit fear and skillfully made illusions to knock you off balance. Instead of wavering, you remained there still. It was not arrogance. It was certainty, You refused to give their techniques power. In doing so, you deprived them of their most powerful weapon. The witches were unsure how to treat someone like you. They had spent their lives preying on others' weaknesses, taking advantage of hesitancy and weakness. When such efforts failed, they had nothing to fall back on. The psychological war they depended on to win every battle was rendered ineffective. Their concern was not only that you were resistant to their techniques, it was that your immunity revealed their own reliance on them. They were helpless because they had no fear of being manipulated. And the longer you remained tough, the more their confidence eroded. They discovered too late that they had already lost. This was not a struggle for spells or physical power. It was a war of wills, and yours was impenetrable. Fear no longer controlled you once they realized the struggle was ended. And as a result, they were unable to manage you. You didn't just oppose them. You demolished their whole fighting style before the first strike had even delivered. Number 8, you used their own tools against them. Witches lived on hubris, believing that their mystery made them invincible. They concealed behind their dark skills, numbers, and carefully crafted facades of might. For years, they relied on the assumption that no one would dare to oppose them, much alone someone alone. To them, your presence was comical. A single individual faces their whole heritage. They believed it was impossible. But here is when their collapse started. Their hubris had blinded them. They misjudged you, believing that their sheer numbers and reputation would be enough to defeat you before the combat ever started. They didn't consider you a danger. They saw you as a nuisance. Overconfidence became their vulnerability, but you transformed it into your greatest weapon. You did not battle them on their terms or by their rules. You let their feeling of superiority work for you. Each time they relied on their mystique, it backfired. They believed their rituals and symbols would scare you. Instead, they revealed how much they depended on theatrics. They expected their numbers to overpower you, but their lack of individual strength was obvious as you stood unshaken. They had based their dominance on the belief that no one could threaten their togetherness, and you dispelled that illusion simply by refusing to be intimidated. The irony was awful to them. What they thought made them unstoppable. Their notoriety, dark arts, and solidarity were the same qualities that made them susceptible. You didn't just beat them. You utilized their own tools and hubris to undermine all they stood for. Their error was more than simply a blunder. The catastrophic defect cost them everything. They fell not because of what you brought to the conflict, but because of what they did not recognize in themselves. Number 9, their rituals couldn't penetrate your energy field. The witches were used to battling with their rituals, incantations, and black energies. They felt their spells could overwhelm anybody, and that their low-frequency intents could penetrate even the most resistant brains. But they didn't realize that their rituals couldn't affect you since you worked on a completely other frequency. The victory was not achieved via raw force or power. It was the sheer strength of your energy field. Every negative intention they projected bounced off of you because their low vibrations couldn't penetrate your high-frequency resistance. They attempted to weave their spells around you. They attempted to drag you into their world of fear and deception. But each effort failed against the power of your presence. They had no clue what to do with someone who didn't just defy their power. They neutralized it with the power of their own energy. You didn't need to fight back with raw force because you had something much more powerful, inner strength that wasn't dependent on their spells, tricks, or rituals. Your energy had a force of its own, rendering their dark techniques ineffective. Every effort they made to control or weaken you was absorbed and destroyed by the sheer power of your presence. You did not just outfight them in the classic sense. You openly berated them. They were used to forcing their will onto others. bending people's energy to meet their demands. But you were different. You stood there unshaken, exuding power that they couldn't fathom. Your energy did more than simply protect you. It pushed them back. You weren't only immune to their powers. You were a living, breathing force field, immune to their low-frequency vibrations. Ultimately, the Rites did not fail due to a lack of power. They failed because their energy did not equal yours. Number 10. They knew they couldn't corrupt you. The witches were excellent in the art of corruption. They understood how to manipulate their adversaries' minds, sowing seeds of doubt, making false promises, and gradually converting those who opposed them into puppets. For most, it was only a matter of time until they lost themselves, swayed by the attraction of power or the prospect of survival. But when they met you, they found something they couldn't control, a firm moral compass that operated as an impenetrable wall. They sought to lure you with their power. They provide prohibited information. They made assurances of control. They attempted to get you to doubt your route in order to weaken your beliefs. But they underestimated your character. Every strategy they employed, including subtle manipulations and alluring promises of greatness, failed because you were uninterested in their games. Your honesty was an unbeatable weapon. What they didn't anticipate was that their standard corrupting methods wouldn't work on someone who wasn't motivated by self-interest. You didn't worry about their power or allure since you recognize your own value. Their effort to undermine you by seduction just made them vulnerable. They were accustomed to drawing people into their web, bending them to their will, but not you. Their webs were ineffective in their frantic efforts to corrupt you. They exposed their own weakness. They were not strong due to their magic or numbers. They were strong because they understood how to coerce others into giving up their own might. But you didn't follow their rules. Your tenacity in the face of their efforts rendered them weak and impotent. They did not just fail to corrupt you. They revealed the hollowness of their authority. They were worthless until they could break you. Number 11. You did not vanquish them for glory. You did it because it was necessary. The witches were used to battling for fame, power, or vengeance. Their objectives were based on personal gain, a desire to be admired, or a drive to demonstrate their superiority. But when they met you, they soon recognized that their regular approaches would not work. Because you weren't looking for recognition. You weren't battling for plaudits or to add to your trophy collection. You didn't even fight for yourself. You fought because it was essential. Because the sheer presence of their evil might require an end. And this is what frightened them. You were disconnected in a manner that they could not comprehend. Their whole approach revolved on manipulating their foes with promises of grandeur or using terror to distract them from the broader picture. But you didn't care about fame, terror, or personal gain. You did not require anyone's approval or adoration. You behaved out of need, which made you immovable. This amount of separation made you unpredictable, which was bad news for them. There was no way to negotiate with you, no way to divert your attention with diversions or false promises. They couldn't connect with your ego or feelings. You were not attempting to prove anything. You were not persuaded by promises of power, fortune, or prestige. Your concentration was distinct and unmistakable. That reign of witches had to come to an end. It was a nightmare. They had always been adept at manipulating people by appealing to their needs or concerns. But you did not have either. Your commitment was founded in something deeper, which they couldn't abuse. Your success was not motivated by the desire to prevail over them. It was about carrying out an obligation that could not be disregarded. That unshakable responsibility broke their efforts to dominate or divert you. They were vanquished not just by your power, but also by the sincerity of your aim. Number 12. You exposed their actual character to themselves. The witches spent their lives creating a web of terror and secrecy, painstakingly building an image of invincibility to conceal their actual nature. They used deception to preserve control, persuading others, and sometimes even themselves, that their authority was unquestionable. But when you stood up to them, you didn't merely question their power. You pushed them to face the reality of their own existence, which is the source of their power. The product they'd spent years honing was based on falsehoods. By refusing to be intimidated or persuaded, you took away the masks they had painstakingly built. There was no need to use force or subterfuge to reveal them. All it required was your presence, your uncompromising unwillingness to compromise. Every time they attempted to instill terror, every time they tried to distort your view, you resisted. And with each instant of struggle, you exposed the emptiness behind their alleged authority. They could no longer hide from the facts. Their power was not genuine. It was an illusion, a trick intended to keep people in fear and subservient. Rituals, magic, and secrecy. It was all a veneer designed to make them seem indestructible. And you demonstrated that by standing against them, you forced them to confront the one thing they couldn't avoid, their own vulnerability. What's even more distressing for them is that this self-disclosure occurred too late. They discovered their actual nature after they had already been beaten. The illusion dissolved, revealing the nothingness of their own life. Your win was more than simply a blow to their physical might. It was a psychological loss that wrecked their whole self-concept. They didn't just lose the war. They lost their identity, sense of self, and their hold on the very thing they had spent their lives defending, the illusion that they were untouchable. Number 13, your legacy will outlast their myths. Over generations, witches created their own mythology, transforming themselves into mythical beings of evil power. Their names were whispered in horror, and their rites were regarded as holy and untouchable. They believed that their combined strength was eternal, handed down through generations, and grew stronger with each new member of their coven. They wanted to be remembered as the ultimate source of evil, a power that could never be opposed. But standing alone against them resulted in something much more significant than their loss. You utterly broke that mythology in one decisive move. You revealed the reality that they had spent so long concealing. You didn't just vanquish them physically. You demolished the narrative that had kept them relevant. Their mythologies, those myths of indestructible witches and terrible powers that controlled, without question, fell in the face of your unwavering honesty. By opposing them, you demonstrated that no power, no matter how old or collective, is invincible. Your legacy, unlike theirs, will endure. Future generations will not associate the witches' names with terror. They'll recall how one guy brought down the apparently invincible and revealed the deception of collective evil. You become a symbol, a narrative of resistance that would be shared and repeated. A reminder that genuine strength is not found in numbers or rituals, but in the fortitude to stand alone and call the falsehood out for what it is. No evil force, no matter how powerful, can destroy the legacy you've built. Witches will be forgotten, but your name will go down in history as the one who destroyed their fantasies. You didn't just beat them. You became live evidence that the myths they created for themselves were nothing but smoke and mirrors. And a one individual staying firm may shift the course of history. Finally, your triumph was more than just defeating a coven of witches. It was the breakdown of everything they represented. You demolished their illusions, revealed their flaws, and forced them to acknowledge their own vulnerability. You stood alone, unshakable, not for recognition or glory, but because it was required. You did not fight just with strength or cunning. You fought with purpose, a firm moral compass that no malevolent force could influence. The horror they created fell in the face of your will. And in that instant, you were a live example of the reality that power isn't measured by numbers, spells, or terror. It is judged by the individual's integrity and strength. Your legacy from this struggle will endure. The myths they established will vanish, and you will be remembered as the one who revealed their lie. Future generations will remember you not as a simple conqueror, but as a force for truth. A real example of the notion that no darkness is too deep, no adversary too strong. If you're solid about who you are, the witches thought they were forever. They were incorrect. You have shown that genuine power is everlasting, and it is found in the unflinching bravery of a single, determined person. That is a win that cannot be undone, a fact that will outlive any dark tale they have ever invented. If you love this amazing trip and want more material that defies convention and delves deep into the unusual, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Hit the like button, share with your friends, and leave your opinions in the comment section below. We'd love to know what you think. Stay tuned for more, because the narrative does not conclude here. Let's keep pushing limits together. If you're enjoying the content on Pure Wisdom and find value in the messages we share, I encourage you to subscribe. Based on the latest analytics, 93.9% of viewers are watching without subscribing. By subscribing, you not only stay updated with new content, but also support the channel's growth, allowing us to continue spreading wisdom for the chosen ones. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an important message. Let's build this community together.